Edward stood in front of the door, his fingers tight around the bouquet of deep red roses. The scent of them, once sweet, now felt suffocating. His heart pounded against his ribs, a heavy, unrelenting force. The dimly lit hallway seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing inward. The house was silent, save for the sounds from behind the closed bedroom door. Soft gasps, a low moan, the unmistakable rhythm of bodies moving together. A sick wave of nausea washed over him. His grip loosened, the bouquet slipping slightly before he caught it again. His knuckles turned white around the stems, thorns digging into his palm. He could burst in, catch them in the act, demand an explanation. But for what he already knew, the truth. His breathing was slow and deliberate, but rage curled inside him like a snake ready to strike. His throat was tight, burning with words he wanted to scream. His jaw clenched so hard he imagined the scene inside, his wife, Kitty, tangled in another man's arms. Whispering things meant only for him, the man Ethan Grant Ram, the charming diplomat who shook his hand just last week. Smirking in the aftermath, his stomach twisted at the thought. Edward stepped back. His legs felt unsteady as if the floor beneath him had turned to water. His rational mind screamed at him to turn away, to walk out the door and never look back. But another part, the one seething with betrayal, wanted him to rip that door open and drag them both into the light. Let them see the raw fury in his eyes. Let them choke on their shame if they even felt any. His hand hovered over the doorknob. Just one twist, one push. But then what he could hear, his own voice in his head shaking hollow, broken. How long, Kitty? How many times? And he knew her answer before she could even speak. Edward, I can explain. No, he didn't need her lies, her pathetic excuses. He was not going to stand there, humiliated while she fumbled for words. He was not going to let that bastard sit there, smug and indifferent. He deserved better than that. He deserved revenge. With slow, controlled movements, Edward turned on his heel and walked toward the living room. Placed the bouquet on the glass coffee table, the petals trembling slightly as he set them down. Then, without a sound, he strode toward the front door and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit him like a slap, shocking him back to reality. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one with shaking hands. The first drag burned his lungs, grounding him. His mind raced. This wasn't going to break him. Kitty thought she could walk all over him, that he would just accept it. No, he would show her just how wrong she was. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number, his voice eerily calm when the other end picked up. I'm taking the assignment, the humanitarian mission. Start the paperwork and book an extra ticket for my wife. A pause. Then a hesitant voice responded. Dr. Carter, comma. Are you sure this situation is extremely dangerous? I need to confirm that I'm sure. Edward interrupted his voice. Steele, just make the arrangements. He ended the call and exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl into the dark sky. His hands no longer shook. The decision was made. Kitty wanted to play with fire. He was about to throw her into an inferno. Edward wasn't used to feeling stupid. He'd always been the smartest person in the room. Even as a child, he had an uncanny ability to understand complex theories that left even adults perplexed. But intelligence rarely wins popularity contests. In school, he was the boy with glasses too large for his face, the one everyone called on only when they needed homework answers. Conversations with his peers were short-lived, limited to hurried exchanges before tests in university. It was the same. He was tolerated, never truly accepted. When others were drinking and dating, he was in the library, lost in research. He watched from the sidelines as friendships and romances formed around him. Always the observer, never the participant. But adulthood had given him a different kind of status. Edward was now a respected scientist, admired for his work, if not for his charm. Women did not flock to him, but his colleagues listened when he spoke. That was enough until Kitty. He returned home for the holidays, stepping onto the familiar pavement of his childhood town. It was smaller than he remembered, suffocating in ways he had long since forgotten. The sky was low, the houses uniform, the streets eerily quiet. Then he saw her, a flash of golden hair, a girl moving swiftly, her coat flaring behind her like a banner. She was sneaking out of her parents' house, her face set with defiance. She nearly crashed into him. Edward instinctively reached out, steadying her by the arm. Whoa, going somewhere. The girl jerked back, eyes flashing with annoyance. Who the hell are you, Edward, and you? She hesitated, glancing toward the house she had just escaped from. Then smirked Kitty. Edward took in disheveled appearance, the hurriedly packed bag, the untied shoelaces, the raw frustration in her eyes. You're running away. It wasn't a question. And what's it to you? He hesitated. Nothing, I suppose. Just you don't look like you have a plan. Kitty scoffed. I don't need one. Anything's better than being trapped in that house. Edward glanced toward the window, where a stern-looking man passed by her father, your parents. Kitty rolled her eyes, strict, religious, controlling. You get the picture, he did. He understood the desperation of wanting to escape a place that felt too small. And yet, he also knew what it was like to have nowhere to go. Let me buy you dinner, he said. Suddenly, Kitty blinked. Excuse me, dinner, just a meal. You look like you could use a break before you figure out your next move. She studied him, then grinned, something mischievous sparking in her eyes. Are you hitting on me? Edward's face heated. No, I just relax. Kitty laughed. Fine, one meal. But if you're boring, I'm leaving. He didn't know then that one dinner would turn into something more. Kitty married Edward not long after he was her escape from the stifling town, from her overbearing religious parents, who dictated every part of her life. Her father was strict, a man who believed in punishment as much as prayer. Her mother was passive, resigned to a life of quiet obedience. Kitty had spent her entire life being told what to do, how to act, what to believe. With Edward, she could leave. He took her to the city, to a life she never thought possible, and for a while, they were happy. Then came the baby. Edward had never known such joy. Holding his son in his arms, he felt something unlock inside him, a fierce, consuming love. For once, he was not just a scientist or a husband. He was a father. He would come home from work just to watch the baby sleep, marveling at how someone so small could change everything. But happiness is fickle. The accident took their child when he was 10, leaving behind only grief. Edward and Kitty drifted apart. She became distant, retreating into a world of late nights and empty smiles. He buried himself in work, in things he could control. One night, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence became unbearable. Do you even care anymore? Kitty's voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness. Edward set his fork down, staring at her. Of course I care. Then why do you act like you? Don't you go to work? Come home late, barely say 2 words to me. He clenched his jaw. And what do you do, Kitty? You pretend he never existed. You wiped every trace of him from this house. She scoffed, shaking her head. That's how I survive, Edward. I can't sit in a nursery that will never be used again. I can't stare at clothes that will never be worn. I have to keep moving or I'll drown. Edward exhaled, slowly rubbing his temples. And you think I haven't drowned already? I see him in everything. I can't erase him. Kitty's expression hardened. You think you grieve more than I do? That just because I don't sit around crying, I don't feel it. I think you're pretending. It never happened. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And you're pretending I never happened. You bury yourself in work, in microbes and test tubes. Anything but me. His chest tightened. What do you want from me, Kitty? You think I don't wake up every day feeling like I failed? You think I don't see his face every time I close my eyes? Her voice cracked. I feel like I lost both of you. Edward swallowed hard. I'm still here. She gave him a long, tired look. No, Edward, you're not silence. The distance between them was a canyon. Neither of them knew how to cross. The evening of the Institute's gala was a spectacle of refinement and power. The grand hall was adorned with towering crystal chandeliers, their light casting a golden glow over the polished marble floors. Men in impeccably tailored suits and women in flowing gowns moved like pieces on a chessboard, engaging in quiet conversations filled with subtle power plays. Edward, in his classic black tuxedo, stood near the entrance, a glass of whiskey in hand beside him. Kitty was a vision. In a deep emerald gown that clung to her frame with effortless grace. For the first time in what felt like years, she looked radiant. She laughed easily, her eyes bright, her smile genuine. Then came the Grahams. Ethan Graham commanded attention the moment he entered. Tall, confident, exuding the charm of a man who knew exactly how to make people like him. His wife, Lillian, was poised, elegant in a navy blue gown. The perfect diplomat's wife. Their introductions were smooth, the kind of polished exchanges expected in their circles. Edward Carter, the brilliant mind in the stud study of the most dangerous viruses of the 21st century, if I'm not mistaken. Ethan extended a firm handshake in honor. Edward nodded. Polite, Ethan Graham. Your reputation precedes you beside them. Kitty and Lillian exchanged pleasantries, though Kitty's eyes flickered towards Ethan with curiosity. The way he held himself, the way he looked at her, not as a scientist's wife, but as a woman, was different. Mrs. Carter. Ethan smiled, offering his hand. Would you do me the honor of a dance? Kitty hesitated for the briefest moment before accepting. As they moved on to the dance floor, Edward felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest. Lillian turned to him with a warm smile. Shall we, Dr. Carter? Reluctantly, he nodded as the music played. The dance was formal, yet intimate. Ethan and Kitty moved effortlessly, the chemistry between them undeniable. Edward tried to focus on his own steps, but his eyes kept drifting towards them. By the end of the evening, Ethan extended an invitation. Join us for dinner sometime, a proper evening with good wine and even better company. Kitty's eyes sparkled. We'd love to. After that, the families became friends. Kitty and Lailan went shopping while the men played golf. The couples increasingly had dinner together and even went on vacations. That was the beginning of something Edward didn't yet understand. Not then Edward entered the Institute's main building, the familiar scent of paper and polished wood surrounding him. He had just finished a lecture on emerging viral threats, his passion for the subject evident. As always. As he walked through the hallway, he was greeted by several colleagues with friendly nods and smiles. His mind, however, was preoccupied, distracted by thoughts of his wife Kitty and the dark weight of their recent arguments. As he approached the director's office, he noticed the door slightly ajar. Mr. Frozen, the Institute's director, was sitting behind his large mahogany desk. He looked up and motioned for Edward to enter. "Edward," Mr. Frozen said, his voice low, but filled with authority. "Please come in. I'd like to have a word with you." Edward closed the door behind him and took a seat across from the director. He had worked with Mr. Frozen for years, and their relationship was one of mutual respect and trust. The director, a man in his early 60s with sharp features and a commanding presence, had always been supportive of Edward's work. They often collaborated on projects, and it was no surprise that Edward had been called in for. "This private meeting is something urgent?" Edward asked, noting the serious expression on the director's face. Mr. Frozen leaned forward, slightly, clasping his hands together on the desk. "You could say that, yes, we've just received a request from several peacekeeping organizations. They need a team of scientists, including a virologist, to investigate a viral outbreak in an Asian settlement." Edward's interest piqued immediately. He had dealt with viruses his entire career, but an outbreak on this scale was something different. "What kind of virus are we talking about?" Edward asked, his tone measured, but with a hint of concern. The director sighed, clearly reluctant to divulge too much information. "The details are sparse. We don't have much data yet. But what we do know is that this virus bears a striking resemblance to Chera and its symptoms, though it's far more dangerous. The infected show rapid deterioration, and there's no known cure. It's spreading, and it has the potential to become an epidemic, or even a pandemic." Edward listened intently, his mind already racing through the possible scientific implications. "And what exactly do you need from me?" he asked. "What's my role in this?" "You are one of the best virologists we have." Mr. Frozen replied, "We need you to identify the virus, trace its origins, and, if possible, develop a vaccine. This is a dangerous mission, Edward, but it's vital. The outbreak has been kept under wraps. Only a few select organizations are aware of it. The media has been kept in the dark, and we need to keep it that way for now." Edward nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "How soon would I have to leave?" he asked, already feeling the pressure of the decision immediately. Mr. Frozen said, "The sooner the better. You'll be briefed on all the specifics once you're on site. For now, it's imperative that we don't let anyone outside of our circle know about this." Edward leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications of what he had just heard. He had dedicated his life to the study of viruses. But this was something different, something personal, something that could cost lives, not just in the settlement, but potentially around the world if it spread. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, his thoughts shifting momentarily to Kitty. Their marriage, once full of promise, had become strained in recent years. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving her behind, especially in light of their recent difficulties. "I understand the urgency," Edward said after a long pause. "But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Frozen. I'm not sure I can leave my wife alone, Kitty. Has been struggling with the loss of our son, and I don't know if she can handle it if I leave her now." Mr. Frozen gave him a sympathetic look. "I understand, Edward. This is a difficult choice, but sometimes duty calls. You've always been dedicated to your work, and this could be your chance to make a real difference. I won't tell you what to do, but I can assure you this mission will be crucial in the fight against this virus." Edward nodded slowly, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his chair as he processed the director's words. The decision wasn't easy, and he knew that whatever he chose would change the course of his life forever. "I'll think about it," Edward said. Finally, standing up from his chair, "I need to talk to Kitty to explain things to her. I'll let you know my decision soon, of course," Mr. Frozen replied, standing as well and offering his hand. "Take your time, but remember the clock is ticking." Edward shook the director's hand firmly, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders as he walked out of the office and down the corridor. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life, his relationship with Kitty, his career, was at a crossroads. The choice seemed impossible, but in his heart, he knew there was no turning back. He had dedicated his life to science, and now more than ever, his expertise could save countless lives. But at what cost? As he stepped out of the institute and into the crisp afternoon air, Edward couldn't help but wonder what his future would hold and what kind of man he would become. After all of this, Edward stood in front of the florist's shop, the cool autumn air ruffling his coat as he looked at the display of roses before him. It was a difficult decision, one that felt strangely out of place in the midst of his growing tension. He had never been one for grand gestures, especially when it came to his wife Kitty. But today, he was determined to do something right. After all, there was no telling how long it might be before he saw her again. And if he were honest, he needed her to forgive him. He needed her to trust him. He chose the perfect 101 roses, carefully selecting each one, their deep red petals, soft and lush. It wasn't just about the number, though. It was about the gesture. She'll love them, he thought, pushing the guilt deep inside Shek. Forgive me for everything. Once she sees these as he made his way home, the thoughts of their fragile relationship filled his mind. There was so much he needed to explain to her, so much he had been hiding. But today, he didn't want to dwell on it. He wanted to make things right. The conversation he was about to have, the one about the mission, was going to be hard. But for now, he would offer her roses, the kind of thing that could soften her heart. When he entered the house, he was hit by a strange, unsettling sensation. The quiet of the home, normally soothing, now felt like a warning. He placed the bouquet down on the entry table, the soft rustling of the roses in the still air, an eerie contrast to the pounding of his own heart. And then something caught his eye. By the door near the hallway there were expensive loafers, a style he knew all too well. They were the kind of shoes that only Ethan would wear, the kind of shoes that screamed luxury, something he couldn't afford, something he never cared for. His heart sank as his fingers brushed against the cool surface of the flowers. The weight of what he was seeing. Ethan's shoes settled over him like a crushing weight. His mind raced. Not again, he thought, clenching his fists. Not in my house, he didn't think. Didn't even take a breath before rushing toward the bedroom, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the hallway. As he approached, he could hear it at the unmistakable sounds from inside, sounds that told him everything he needed to know. They're together. He thought fury bubbling up inside him like a volcano ready to erupt. Edward paused just before the door. His hand gripped the cold doorknob. He could feel the heat of the anger in his chest, could feel his pulse hammering in his throat. Open it. He thought, just open the door. But his hand didn't move. The door remained closed, his body frozen. The words of his late father flashed in his mind. Don't act. In the heat of the moment, he turned away. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles whitened. He walked back down the hall, his breathing slow and controlled, as though he were the calm center of a storm. He made his way to the living room and set the roses gently in a vase on the coffee table, as if nothing had happened. But inside, everything was shattering. Every fiber of his being screamed to confront them, to open that door, to force them to face what they were doing. but he didn't not. Yet the time would come. Edward walked out to the backyard, his mind a storm of thoughts of fury and hurt. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the air as he tried to steady his nerves. He took another long drag, pretending that he could still hold everything together, pretending that he wasn't breaking. Inside, taking out his phone, he dialed Ethan's number deliberately, with the cold professionalism of a delivery man. The line rang twice before a voice answered. "Hello?" Lillian's voice was light, unaware of the storm brewing in the background. "Is Ethan home?" Edward's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something sharp just beneath the surface. Leyland hesitated for a moment. "No, Hune's not here." "And who asks?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Edward felt a flicker of something dark and sharp pass through him, but he forced himself to smile, though no one could see it. "I'm a courier, and I have to deliver the package to him personally. I'll call you back later." He replied coolly, "Thanks." He ended the call, his fingers gripping the phone tighter as he thought about his next move. Does she know? He wondered. Does Lillian know about all this? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it didn't matter. What mattered was what he was about to do. What mattered was that his wife, his weak, fragile wife, was going to learn the consequences of her actions. Edward walked back into the house, his resolve hardening with each step. He took a deep breath and dialed the number for the Institute, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for the connection. The director answered almost immediately, his voice. "Stern and professional Edward. I assume you've had some time to think about the mission." Edward took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Yes," he said, his voice low and firm. "I'm ready to go. I'll leave immediately." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Edward could almost hear the director's surprise. "I see, well, that's good to hear. But are you sure you understand the risks? This mission isn't safe, Edward. It's dangerous." "You could, I understand." Edward interrupted, his voice hard. "I'm ready, but there's one thing. I'll be bringing my wife with me. She insists on coming, and I won't leave her behind." The director's surprise was palpable. "Your wife, are you sure?" Edward's lips curled into a cold smile, though it was all in his head. "Yes," he said, his voice calm. "She understands everything. The danger, the consequences, Sheck coming with me, and that's final." "Very well," the director replied after a moment's pause. "Weck, make the arrangements. I'll have everything prepared for you both." As he hung up the phone, Edward stood there, his heart racing. He could feel his fingers trembling slightly, the reality of what he had just agreed to settling in. But there was no going back now. He looked out the window, the sky slowly darkening. This is it? He thought, this is the path I've chosen. We'll see if she survives it. A sick satisfaction churned in his gut as he lit another cigarette, staring out into the night. Whatever happened now? Whether Kitty survived this trip or not, he knew one thing. It was the price she had to pay. Edward never told Kitty that he had seen everything, and the days dragged on as usual, until it was time to tell her about the mission from the Institute. Edward walked into the house, his expression unreadable. He found Kitty lounging in the parlor, flipping through a fashion magazine with disinterest. A crystal glass of wine rested on the small side table beside her, its deep red hue catching the dim evening light. She barely looked up when he entered. "I've accepted a field assignment," Edward said calmly, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of something unspoken. Kitty perked up, smiling slightly. Oh, that's wonderful, darling, a chance to be out in the field again. When do you leave? Edward watched her reaction carefully, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to think she had misunderstood. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned against the door frame. We leave in 3 days. Kitty's smile froze. The delicate crystal glass in her hand trembled slightly. We? Yes, you and I together. She set the magazine down, sitting up straighter, her pulse quickening. Edward, surely you don't mean me. What would I do in some? Where exactly is this? Her voice held a forced lightness, but her fingers gripped the armrest of the chair a little too tightly. Edward folded his arms, tilting his head slightly as he observed her. A small province in Southeast Asia, remote, isolated. It's an epidemiological crisis, and I've been asked to lead the research team. Kitty blinked the words, sinking in. That sounds serious. It is. But I don't see why you'd want to stay here. There's nothing keeping us here, is there? Edward's voice was smooth, but the implication was sharp. His dark eyes locked onto hers, searching, waiting. Kitty inhaled sharply, then forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Darling, I'd be useless there. I'd only get in your way. Edward shook his head, his expression unreadable. Not at all. You'd be my support. My presence there with my wife would reinforce my position, and if this goes well, I'll be in line for deputy director, maybe even the Nobel Peace Prize. Kitty hesitated. She had never been one for humanitarian causes, but she did appreciate prestige. Deputy director. She repeated slowly as if. Testing how the words felt on her tongue, Edward nodded, stepping closer, lowering his voice just slightly. Yes, and you'd be by my side the whole time. Imagine what that could mean for us. Kitty pressed her lips together. I need to think that evening, long after Edward had retired to his study. Kitty sat alone in the dimly lit bedroom, her hands twisting in her lap. The air felt thick, suffocating. With a trembling breath, she reached for the telephone, dialing a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. Kitty, why are you calling so late? She sighed, pressing her forehead against her. Palm. Edward's taking me to some godforsaken place in Asia. I don't want to go, Ethan. There was silence on the line. Before Ethan spoke, his voice measured. That might be for the best. Kitty frowned, shifting in her seat. Excuse me, what the hell does that mean? Lila knows something's off? She received an anonymous letter. Someone saw me at the hotel. Kitty's stomach twisted. What who would do? That I don't know, but she's asking questions. I've had to deny everything. Kitty clenched her fist, her nails digging into her palm. So I just disappear while you smooth things over with your wife. Kitty, be reasonable. If you leave now, things will calm down. This could actually work in our favor. She let out a bitter laugh. In our favor. You mean in your favor? I'm being dragged halfway across the world while you stay here and fix your perfect little life. Don't do this. Kitty always knew this wasn't forever. Her breath hitched, not forever. That's what you're saying to me. After everything. Ethan exhaled sharply. I didn't mean it like that. But you knew the risks we both did. Kitty gritted her teeth, her voice shaking. I left everything for you, and now you're telling me I should just conveniently disappear. Kitty, you're being dramatic. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Dramatic, you son of a. I bet you're relieved. With me gone, you don't even have to pretend anymore. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me the truth, Ethan. If I refuse to go, what happens then? Ethan hesitated. Then Lillian will find out. She'll leave me and you'll lose everything too. Kitty swallowed hard. The weight of his words settled in her chest like a stone. So that's it. I'm just supposed to vanish, Kitty? I think it's better this way. Tears welled in her eyes, but she swallowed them back, forcing her voice to stay even fine. She hung up without another word, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her mouth, holding back the panic rising in her throat. The next 2 days were filled with uneasy silence. Kitty packed half-heartedly, sighing dramatically every few minutes. Every item she placed into the suitcase felt like a piece of herself being stripped away. The silk dresses, the perfumes, the carefully selected jewelry. None of it belonged in a remote, disease-ridden village. She didn't belong there. Edward, however, barely acknowledged her distress. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, double-checking their travel documents, finalizing reports, making arrangements. There was a resolve in him she hadn't seen before, and that frightened her. On the morning of their departure, Kitty stood by the car, her suitcase beside her. The city was just waking up the streets, humming with early commuters. She looked up at Edward with an almost desperate expression. Do we really have to do this? Edward smiled thinly, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Yes, darling, we do. Edward and Kitty arrived at the small Asian settlement, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The air was thick, with humidity clinging to their skin like an unwelcome embrace. The dirt roads were uneven, scattered with deep ruts from carts that had long since disappeared. Wooden houses with corrugated metal roofs stood in uneven rows, some barely holding together with frayed tarp and hastily nailed planks. The settlement, though small, had the echoes of a once thriving community, except now it was eerily empty. The few villagers that remained peered cautiously from behind half-shuttered windows or watched from doorways, their expressions wary. Women clutched their children closer, and elderly men, their faces lined with hardship, nodded in quiet acknowledgement before shuffling away. There were no greetings, no curious smiles, only silence, thick and oppressive. As the vehicle rumbled through the narrow streets, they passed a modest, whitewashed building with a small iron cross affixed above the entrance. Several people sat on the steps, their hollow eyes scanning the road ahead. Two figures in loose linen robes moved between them, tending to their needs. With gentle hands, Edward inclined his head towards the building. That's where the missionaries are staying. They've been doing what they can, but supplies are running thin. It won't be long before they start getting sick themselves. Kitty wrinkled her nose as she watched one of the missionaries press a damp cloth against a man's fevered brow. Why don't they just leave? Surely they see. What's happening here? Faith makes men stubborn, Edward replied. Besides, some of them believe it's their duty to stay, even if it kills them. They drove on, finally pulling up to a stark contrast to the rest of the settlement. A grand 2-story villa with faded European charm. It had been built decades ago, likely during colonial rule. Its arched windows and wooden shutters, reminiscent of another world, though weathered, it remained the most formidable structure in the village, standing defiantly against the decay around it. Kitty stepped out of the car and surveyed the home. Well, at least you found us something livable. Edward smirked, setting down their bags. I thought you'd appreciate a touch of civilization. Kitty cast a wary glance around. Why is it so empty here? Edward stretched, rolling his shoulders. The villagers are frightened. Fear spreads faster than the disease itself, but really this virus isn't much worse than the flu. Kitty's brow furrowed then. Why does everyone look like they're waiting to die? Edward's smile was placid, reassuring. Because they don't know any better. Their days quickly fell into a routine. Edward spent long hours at the newly established clinic, donning protective gear and working alongside the few volunteers willing to help. He ordered rigorous sanitation measures, disinfecting surfaces, boiling water, keeping his own body covered at all times. Yet despite his meticulousness, he never once instructed Kitty on these precautions. Kitty, meanwhile, found herself thrust into an unfamiliar role. A nurse. You expect me to be a nurse? She scoffed, staring at the white coat Edward handed her. Everyone contributes, he said smoothly. Besides, Uke, be there for moral support. Think of it as another act of charity. Oh, how noble of me, she muttered sarcastically, but took the cod anyway. Her unease grew by the day. The sickness was unlike anything she had ever seen. Patients lay in CS, writhing in pain. Some suffered from relentless vomiting and diarrhea, their bodies reduced to fragile husks. The worst cases suffered hallucinations, their eyes glassy as they whispered fevered delusions. One afternoon, while Edward was in his office, he called over a young boy, no older than 12. With sharp, knowing eyes, he pressed a few folded bills into the boy's small hands. You know the foreign woman? Edward asked in the boy's language. The boy nodded. I want you to follow her around all the time. I want to know what she's doing, who she's talking to, absolutely everything. Do you understand me? You have very poor communication in the settlement. I'm not talking about the internet at all, so she'll most likely use the post office if she wants to contact someone from our house. The boy hesitated for only a moment before tucking the money into his pocket. I can do that. Days later, Edward sat at his desk, unfolding the first intercepted letter. Kitty's elegant script danced across the page, but it was not the words that interested him. It was the name at the top. Ethan. His fingers tightened around the paper. His jaw set in quiet satisfaction. He had her now. Edward returned to the house late that evening, exhaustion dragging at his limbs. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hands still tingling from hours of sanitizing and treating patients. He wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed. But as soon as he stepped inside, he was met with the sharp sound of Kitty's voice slicing through the humid air. You lied to me, Edward, she screamed, her eyes wild, pacing the room like a caged animal. You said this was nothing more than the flu. You knew how bad it was, and you still brought me here. Edward exhaled, rubbing his temples. Lower your voice, Kitty. You'll wake the entire village. Oh, to hell with the village, she spat, marching up to him. Do you think I'm blind? I've seen them. I've seen people convulsing. I watched a woman hold her child as he took his last breath. Edward, you told me this was safe. Why did you bring me here? Edward stared at her, his expression impassive. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of crumpled papers. Kitty frowned her breath, still ragged from shouting. What is that? Edward stepped forward, pressing the letters into her hands. Read them. Kitty's fingers trembled as she unfolded the first letter. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Ethan, I miss you. This place is hell, and I don't know how much longer I can stand it. I wish I were with you. Instead, she swallowed hard, lifting her eyes to meet Edward's. Where did you get these? Edward's voice was cold. A boy from the village intercepted them for me. Every single one. You wrote to your precious Ethan. Kitty's mouth opened and closed, searching for an excuse, a lie that could undo this moment. Edward, it's not. Don't insult me by pretending. He took a step closer, his voice dangerously quiet. Now, how long, Kitty? How long have you been making a fool of me? She hesitated for only a second before straightening her spine. Does it matter? I was never in love with you, Edward. I married you because you were my way out, and I endured it for years, pretending playing house while you lost yourself in your work. His breath hitched, but he kept his face emotionless. I gave you everything, a home secure, my love. Kitty laughed bitterly, and I gave you what you wanted, a pretty wife to complete your picture. Perfect life. It was a trade, Edward. Don't act like you didn't know for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was suffocating, heavier than the thick disease-laden air outside. Finally, Kitty took a deep breath, lifting her chin. Defiantly. I'm leaving. I'm done pretending. I'll be on the first transport out of this miserable place, and when I get back, I'll file for divorce. You can keep your little mission and your damn hero complex. Edward didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, his expression unreadable. No, Kitty, you're not going anywhere, she scoffed, crossing her arms. Oh, and how exactly do you plan to stop me? Edward smirked. Reaching into his desk drawer, he pulled out another set of papers, photocopies of her letters. If you leave, I'll make sure these find their way to Ethan's wife, and then to the press. What do you think happens to a diplomat when his dirty little secrets are aired for the world to see? Kitty's face paled. You wouldn't. Edward leaned in his voice, a whisper against her ear. Try me. She took a shaky breath, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was none. He had won. Finally, she exhaled. Defeated? Fine, you win. She turned away, staring out the window into the darkness. I'll stay. But don't think for a second that this means I've forgiven you. Edward chuckled, stepping back. Oh, darling, I don't need your forgiveness. I just need you to stay right where you are. The next morning, Kitty walked into the hospital as if nothing had happened. She moved with confidence, her crisp white uniform spotless, her blonde hair neatly tied back. Edward watched her from his office window, his hands clenched into fists. She's acting like she belongs here, he muttered under his breath, like she isn't a liar. After their conversation the night before, when he finally laid out the truth, told her he knew about Ethan, he had expected something, a reaction, a confrontation, even rage, but instead, Kitty had merely looked at him, then gone to bed as if nothing had changed. What's your next move, Kitty? He wondered. Watching as she entered the ward, greeting patients and staff with a warm smile, Edward shook his head and turned back to his work if she wanted to pretend. Let her. He had bigger concerns, like getting the vaccine ready. The world outside this settlement wasn't coming to save them. He was their only hope. Hours later after lunch, Edward returned to his office and immediately felt something was wrong. The room had a stillness to it that set his nerves on edge. His desk was off. Papers that should have been in neat stacks were slightly shifted as if someone had been searching through them. His heart pounded, and then he saw it. The locked cabinet where he kept the vaccine samples and medical supplies. It was open. Empty. Edward's breath caught in his throat as he rushed forward, yanking open the drawers, the vials, the research, the microscope gone. Everything he needed to continue his work. His pulse roared in his ears. No, 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 this can't be happening. He slammed the drawer shut, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk so hard. His knuckles turned white. He forced himself to think, who could have done this? One of the villagers, someone desperate to sell the equipment. A rival scientist. Then, like a knife, piercing through the fog of confusion, a voice cut through the silence looking for something. Edward turned sharply. Kitty stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. His stomach dropped. No, it can't be you. He breathed the realization crashing down on him like a tidal wave. You stole it. Kitty shrugged, stepping further into the room. I prefer borrowed, let not be dramatic. Edward was on her in an instant, gripping her arms. Do you have any idea what you've done? People will die because of this. We don't have time to wait for replacements. Kitty tilted her head unfazed. Then I guess you'd better listen to me. He let go of her, shaking his head in disbelief. Where is it? She smiled sweetly. I'll give it all back, Edward. Every last vial, every last piece of equipment. But first, you're going to sign the divorce papers, and I want half of everything, every account, every investment, or everything I stole. She leaned in her voice, dropping to a whisper. Goes up in flames. Edward stared at her, barely able to process what he was hearing. You're insane. She sighed. No, Edward. I'm done. Done pretending. Done playing your obedient wife. You want to ruin my life. Fine. But I'm not leaving empty-handed. His hands curled into fists. I won't give you a damn thing. Kitty's eyes darkened. Then you're sentencing all these people to death. Edward's mind raced. He could see it in her face. She meant it. She would destroy everything if he didn't comply. The villagers, the volunteers, the children. They were all collateral to her. Then suddenly her expression changed. Her smirk wavered. She swayed slightly, Kitty. Edward took a cautious step toward her. What wrong? She blinked rapidly, then wobbled again. I don't. Before she could finish, her knees buckled. Edward lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Her skin was burning hot. No, he whispered, pressing 2 fingers to her pulse. It was weak, erratic. Help. I need help in here. He bellowed, his voice raw. Within minutes, the room was a flurry of movement. Volunteers and medics flooded in, lifting Kitty onto a cot. Edward barely heard them as they spoke, his mind running through every possibility. The fever, the weakness. It could only mean one thing. Kitty was infected, damn it, he whispered, pushing a hand through his hair. He couldn't focus on her now. He had to get the vaccine back before more lives were lost. I want every able-bodied person out there searching. He ordered the volunteers. Find the supplies, find the research, check everywhere. Kitty couldn't have done this alone. They scattered and Edward forced himself to stay calm. He knew Kitty too well. She was careful. She would have hidden it somewhere secure, somewhere only she could control. Then it hit him. The church. Kitty had spent a lot of time with the missionaries lately. She knew that they only used part of the church building. The rest was abandoned. When Edward and a small group of volunteers arrived, they found the door locked. Kicking it open, they rushed inside, and there it was, crates stacked neatly, vials still intact, the microscope, his research. It was all here. Relief flooded through him. Get this back to the lab now. As the volunteers rushed to gather the stolen supplies, Edward exhaled sharply, his hands on his knees. Kitty had tried to destroy everything he worked for, and now she was paying the price back at the hospital. Edward stood over Kitty's unconscious body, watching the rise and fall of her shallow breaths. The woman who had tried to ruin him, who had stolen the one thing that could save lives, was now at death's door herself. Edward clenched his jaw. Letton, see if you can survive this, Kitty. Edward stood over the small wooden table, his hands trembling as he examined the vial of the vaccine. It had taken him days long, grueling days of research, testing and refining to reach this point. The weight of exhaustion pressed on his shoulders, but a flicker of triumph burned in his chest. The vaccine was ready. He had tested it on a young volunteer from the village, one of the first infected. And now, after nearly 48 hours, the boy was stable. Fever gone, symptoms receding, it was working. Edward ran a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of unshaven stubble. His gaze shifted to the cot. In the corner of the room where Kitty lay, sweat drenched her skin, strands of hair clinging to her face. As she murmured incoherently, her body twitched with fever-induced tremors. It was time he reached for a syringe, drawing the liquid into it. With meticulous care, he had saved the entire village. Could he deny her the same chance? He hesitated. Does she deserve it? The thought echoed through his mind. Relentless, his jaw clenched his grip on the syringe, tightening the betrayal, the lies, the deception that had nearly cost innocent lives. She had been willing to barter their survival for her own selfish escape. Could he truly bring himself to save her now? A ragged breath left his lips as he knelt beside her. The fever had turned her into a ghost of the woman. She once was pale, sunken cheeks, lips cracked from dehydration. And then suddenly, she mumbled something. At first, it was incoherent, a jumble of feverish whispers. Then her voice rose horror, but clear enough to make Edward freeze. No, don't let him go out the gate. I didn't lock it. He ran. I told him to wait. His blood ran cold, Kitty. He chirped, barely recognizing his own voice. What did you say? She turned her head slightly, eyes fluttering, but she wasn't looking at him. She was lost in the past, trapped in her own delirium. It wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to. I was inside with my lover. I thought I had time. Edward's breath hitched. His entire body went rigid as the pieces fell into place. Their son, the accident. The night his world had shattered, his hand, still holding the syringe, shook violently. He felt sick. Kitty let out a soft whimper, her fevered mind still spilling confessions she never intended to make. I heard the tire screech. I ran out, but it was too late, too late. Edward lurched to his feet, stumbling back as if struck. A wave of nausea rolled through him, bile rising in his throat. His free hand clamped over his mouth, his chest heaving. It was her fault. Not just the affairs, not just the lies. His son had gone because of her, because she was too caught up in her own pleasure to watch him. His vision blurred, fury twisting into something raw, something unbearable. He had spent years mourning, blaming fate, cursing the universe for taking his child away, and all this time, it was her his gaze fell to the vaccine in his hand. The cure, the salvation she didn't deserve. Kitty moaned her body, arching slightly, lips parting in another unintelligible whisper. He stepped closer, looming over her, the vaccine just inches from her arm. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. One injection, that was all it would take, but his fingers wouldn't move. Would saving her make him a better man, or just a fool? His thoughts clashed violently, his mind screaming at him in two directions. But the memory of his son's laughter, the warmth of his small hand in Edward's, drowned out everything else. He thought of the empty space beside him at night, the toys that had gathered dust, the ache that never faded. His expression hardened. The decision settled in his chest like lead. Slowly, Deliberately, Edward placed the vaccine back on the table. Kitty shuddered beneath the thin blanket, lost to the fever, unaware that her fate had just been sealed. 2 days later, she was gone. Edward stepped into his house. The familiar scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee welcoming him back after months in the field. The weight of exhaustion pressed on his shoulders, but there was an undeniable lightness in his chest. He had done what he set out to do. The world was a little less broken because of him. He dropped his keys on the table and loosened his tie before sinking into the couch. The television remote felt oddly foreign in his hand. He hadn't watched the news in months. With a sigh, he switched it on. The screen lit up with the face of a news anchor. Her expression, a mix of professionalism and intrigue. Tonight, a shocking scandal rocks the diplomatic world ambassador. Ethan Langley faces both personal and professional ruin as new allegations emerge. Edward sat up, his eyes narrowing. It began with reports of infidelity after his wife filed for divorce, citing undeniable proof of multiple affairs. Anonymous sources provided photographs and correspondence that left no room for denial. But the scandal does not end there. As the media turned its focus on Langley, a much graver issue came to light: his failure in handling the crisis in Southeast Asia. The screen shifted to images of the very village Edward had spent months working in. People lining up for vaccines, children playing outside makeshift hospitals, the banners of humanitarian organizations fluttering in the wind. Government sources confirmed that Langley not only failed to provide the necessary diplomatic support, but actively withheld critical information regarding the outbreak. If not for the independent efforts of the Virology Institute and Dr. Edward Carter, the situation could have escalated to catastrophic levels, endangering international relations. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at Edward's lips. Langley has not responded to these allegations, and it remains unclear what legal or professional consequences he will face. Edward turned off the television. There was no satisfaction in watching a man unravel, but there was justice in it. Ethan Langley had buried him once. Now he was the one sinking into oblivion. A soft shuffle of feet drew Edward's attention. Standing at the edge of the room, holding a book in his small hands. "Was the boy come here, Liam?" Edward said softly. The boy hesitated for a second before walking over. Edward placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of a child who had lost everything, but had somehow found a home. "Was that about the bad man?" Liam asked, his voice laced with the innocence only a child could still possess. Edward exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yes, but we don't need to think about him anymore." Liam tilted his head. "Because we're safe now." Edward's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because we're moving forward." Months passed, and the world moved on. Edward buried himself in his work, ensuring the vaccine reached every corner of the affected regions. He barely thought about the scandal, the betrayals, the revenge. All that mattered was the future. And then, one day the call came. The trip to Stockholm felt surreal. The weight of history pressed down on his chest as he adjusted his bow tie in the mirror. A suit had never felt more constricting. As he stepped onto the grand stage, applause erupted around him. The vast hall gleamed under chandeliers. The world's brightest minds gathered to witness. The moment he stood before the podium, the golden medallion hanging heavily around his neck, cameras flashed. The world was watching. Edward cleared his throat, his speech in his hands, but his eyes searched for one thing. There among the crowd, a small boy dressed in his very first suit, looking up at him with wide, proud eyes. Liam Edwards smiled for the first time in years. It was real. He leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. This award is not just for scientific achievement. It is for resilience, for hope, for second chances, and for those who never stop fighting for what is right. The hall erupted in applause, but Edward only saw Liam beaming back at him. Maybe, just maybe, the world had given him a second chance too.